In this podcast, the artist Jenny West talks to Chantal Condron about her installation for the British Embassy, Sana'a, Yemen.
Perhaps we can talk about the work at Sana'a. It has a very interesting title. Can you tell me?
Well, the title is 1440 to 0.
Mm-hmm.
That came about really because the piece is made up of 1,440 separate elements that are suspended in the space.
Right.
The 0, we could talk about that now.
Yeah.
It was quite amusing really because I didn't really have a title for the piece when I was working on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to ship the work to an address in Sana'a, and that was to 0 Street.
Oh, that's great.
And I thought the whole piece was about counting down to something.
Quite literally,
Yeah.
yes. So that's always really interesting to understand where work has got its title from. Can you tell us about the starting point for the actual commission, where you started with the whole thoughts about it?
Well, when I was first approached to ask if I would be interested in working on the commission, I was quite excited about it because I've always been really fascinated by Islamic architecture.
Yeah.
So this was an opportunity really to work in an Islamic country context.
Yeah.
And I'd also looked at Yemeni architecture many years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd been fascinated by the kinds of amazing buildings that you find in Sana'a, the capital.
Yeah.
So one of my starting points was that I re-looked again at the architecture of the country.
Mm-hmm.
That was a way of almost beginning to think about what I might do.
Yeah.
But there are several starting points, as ever, with the kind of work that I make. And I had the opportunity quite soon after being approached to go to southern Spain, and I took the opportunity to go to the Alhambra in Granada,
right,
which I'd never been to before, but obviously is a really wonderful site for looking at architecture and looking at space, and looking at the idea of multiples in a space, and thinking about light. And I knew that the space in the embassy had an element of light within it that was going to be important with the work, and I wanted to use it.
Can you tell me about just the physical aspects of bringing that installation together?
Okay, well what happened was I had these kitchen utensils, a number of them, which I was thinking about casting in quite large quantities. But when I actually looked at the space that I was going to work with, I realised that it was very, very high, and the actual area that I could suspend the objects from was quite small. So I knew that the objects almost had to drop quite a long way down the space.
Right.
So that had quite a logistical problem, really. And what I did in my studio initially is I had some existing plumb bobs which I'd used in a previous piece of work that were quite small, quite elegant and elongated. And what I did is I made a scaled down area on the ceiling of the studio and started to suspend these plumb bobs as if they would be larger objects, maybe strainers or sieves or calendars.
Right. Okay.
And what I realised is that the area that I could work with in the embassy could start to have multiples of the plumb bobs, and in a way the models that I started to construct in the studio were really interesting.
And something just seemed right about those shapes.
So although I wasn't going to use the plumb bob, it actually arrived, well...
It evolved in front of your eyes
in a way.
almost. Yeah.
Decisions were made by looking at the tests that I was doing.
Right.
And I had made work previously which took an individual element that was suspended in a space, and the next element was suspended next to it, so they almost formed their own shape.
Okay, sort of
and
entity.
The plumb bobs that I because I was working with this particular scale of the space, it naturally formed into this stepped arrangement that moved down through the space. And again, I was looking at the repetition of form in Islamic architecture, and multiple elements that were quite mathematically organised. I think in terms of the response to the work, well, I think there are two responses really. I think that most of the staff that worked in the embassy, the Yemeni women in particular, they really were enthusiastic about it and really liked it.
Great.
I think some members of staff at the embassy thought it was a bit impractical as a piece of work and were saying, how are we going to clean it and how are we going to keep it clean? So, I don't think that necessarily ruled out whether they liked it or not. I think they were thinking of the practicality. In a way, they're going to have to live with it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think most people thought that it was, that it really altered that particular space. And the fact that the piece can be seen from many different vantage points within the building, and interestingly, is multiplied by all the reflected images of it created by the kind of numerous windows and within the embassy, within the interior of the embassy, is really beautiful as well.
And also you did mention to me before about some of the windows are actually different colours, so you get that effect that your work takes on a completely different appearance if you're sitting in a different office next to it.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming in, telling us about your work.